let us begin with our today's session. Now we have oxygenic conditions developed at 3 billion years ago. So there was a new kind of theory that was put forth by a scientist called Lynn Margulis. Okay, now what she did was she thought uh, there must have been, she just proposed a hypothesis. Okay, she thought that mitochondria and chloroplast, which are the organelles which are observed in eukaryotic cells. Okay, so what she thought, how come these organelles must have been developed? So she proposed a theory stating that these were not the organelles in the first place. Okay, what must have been happened that a bigger prokaryotic organism must have engulfed the smaller prokaryotic organism. Okay, and when that organism inside the host tried to adapt to the conditions, it got permanently residing inside that organism, and slowly and steadily it developed into an organelle. Okay, let me explain why she thought it that way. What was her name? I told you, Lynn Margulis. Okay, so it was the first attempt to explain how eukaryotes must have been originated, because till then we discussed, no, in three domains of life everybody was speculating, okay, archaea first or bacteria first or both came first and then a eukaryote, or some people also said a eukaryote came first and then it got separated from its origin and bacteria and archaea developed. But this theory had some kind of logic placed into it, so that we could hypothesize something about the origination of eukaryotes. Okay, so what this theory exactly mean? This is how the picture would look like. Basically, you have heterotrophic bacteria. Now, if you remember, bacteria which are gaining their source of energy from the organic content, and we had lots of organic matter developed by then, right? So, or heterotrophic bacteria, and we had some of the photosynthetic bacteria, like you remember that we have discussed about cyanobacteria fossils. So we have that two types of organisms or two types of bacteria were there in ancient prokaryotes. And then you can also see here that a prokaryote itself, but a huge one. Okay, so a huge prokaryote engulfed the smaller one, heterotrophic bacteria. And then what must have happened, that she said that the bacteria lived inside and liked inside. Okay, and then it turned out to be a mitochondria over the years. Lot of years it must have taken place. At the same time, when it engulfed the photosynthetic bacteria, that developed into chloroplast in the a higher organism, and that led to generation of plants and plant like protists and so on. So this was the whole theory that she proposed. Mitochondria are self-replicating. When we say all this will have a DNA which is circular and it only one copy. Okay, so single circular DNA. Second important point is all of them divide by something called as binary fission. Now this is seen only in bacteria, right? But if we think about organelles dividing during cell division, then they also divide by binary fission. So she thought that it might be some kind of organism earlier. One more point, that presence of ribosomes. Okay, so together these 3 points made her believe that this could be a possibility, that bacteria were engulfed and that turned out to be into mitochondria or other organelles. One more important observation that later came into existence was there was something called as proteobacterium. Okay. नाम था Rickettsia prowazekii. You all must remember this name, a very well-known organism, and that is what the picture near this text represents. This is nothing but a bacteria's picture, Rickettsia prowazekii. Now that organism was a proteobacterium. This organism was an obligate intracellular parasite. Obligate meaning it had to compulsorily live inside the cell, a particular cell. So it was obligate, intracellular, and it was a parasite. So this particular parasite showed lot of resemblance with the mitochondrial genes that we are having now, which are well known after the sequence analysis. Okay. So what scientists thought, how come a mitochondrial gene have a sequence similar to something known as bacterium? And that gave another boost to the thought process of this endosymbiotic theory. Okay. Second important point, oxygen toxicity was eliminated because intracellular bacterium used aerobic respiration to generate. So basically what happened? ये जो intracellular bacterium था, which was engulfed by a large prokaryote, that bacterium had a capacity to get rid of oxygen. So those organisms which were not able to tolerate oxygen were able to get rid of that oxygen using these organisms. Okay. And in return, the host provided nutrients and safe place to live for those organisms. So therefore, this is an important principle that it is exhibiting, which is called as a symbiosis. However, the symbiosis generally we talk is external, like both the organisms are living separately and they are residing side by side and they are helping each other, right? However, in this case, because one organism is living inside the other organism, we say it is endosymbiosis. Okay, so what is the endosymbiotic theory? The theory says that an organism which was thought to be an ancient heterotrophic big size or large prokaryote engulfed another small size bacteria, developed an endosymbiotic relationship with the host, wherein the host could get rid of oxygen toxicity due to ability of the intracellular bacterium to carry out aerobic respiration, and in return the organism would get protection and a safe place to live within the host. Is this point very clear? Again, the scientists were a little skeptical about then how would you have such evidence for chloroplast as well. So then few scientists worked even on that and they came up with an hypothesis, a part of hypothesis of the endosymbiotic theory itself, wherein they said that a cyanobacterium must have been engulfed and that they found out that cyanobacterium as well, which was called as prochloron. Okay, so the bacterium that was engulfed, which turned out to be the mitochondria, later parts in later stages was Proteobacterium Rickettsia prowazekii. Okay, and Cyanobacterium prochloron was supposed to be the engulfed organism at that time, which turned out to be chloroplast in later stages. So this is still found living inside the marine invertebrates. And this particular prokaryote was thought to be the one because it contains chlorophyll A as well as B, but not phycobilins, which is as similar as that of chloroplast. So these are very important evidence that scientists have found, and that they are proposing this theory based on that any kind of endosymbiosis is always based on some kind of give and take. So these organisms lived inside the host because they were protected, and in return host would also get benefited from these organisms. Okay, so I hope the theory, what the basic line of theory is very clear. Okay, so just a quick overview with the help of a video. The the voice of the video may not be audible to you, but then I will explain what it is trying to tell you, and then later I will put this video on the Google class as well, so that you can yourself go through and try to understand the theory. So basically it starts with what the theory means. Okay.
There are a lot of amazing theories in science.
Are you able to hear anything? Are you able to hear the voice of the... no, okay, fine. So I will explain you what is going on in the video.
The general theory of relativity.
So what he is telling is that there are too many types of theories that are generally into place, but what when we call it as theory and what when we call it as a theory in daily life and science are totally different. Okay, so scientific theories are supposed to be having some proof of evidence and facts supporting it, for which we need to do lots of research, and then when we do research, some theories are rejected. Okay, whereas some theories become which are fortified by the facts, become a super theory, so they are accepted more in number and they become popular. So this is endosymbiotic theory is one such theory among the super theories and most loved and amazing theories on the earth. So they are saying that just an animated cartoon thing, that it has got a word. Anyway, so basically, as we discussed, that it talks about how the endosymbiotic organisms lived then and how a first eukaryote must have been generated. So a quick recap: what is a prokaryote and what is a eukaryote? A pro, which means no nucleus, no membrane bound organelles, and a eukaryote means it has got nucleus and it has got organelles as well. So when prokaryote thinks what is nucleus, it is not knowing what is it. Okay, so when these two cells come together, they definitely have something in common, that they have cell membrane, yes, both of them, cytoplasm, yes, ribosomes, yes, genetic material, yes, but nucleus, prokaryote is unaware of that. Okay, so then how prokaryote to eukaryote transition must have happened, which was a long years ago. Okay. So this is just an ancestor of a prokaryote which was super old, and this is today's prokaryote with a mobile they've shown. Okay. So we know that cyanobacteria would be using photosynthetic energy. I mean, using photosynthesis, they'll be gaining energy, whereas there will be some organisms, now this is very important, there will be some organisms which will be utilizing oxygen to generate ATP. Now we are going to talk about these points more in detail in our rest of the lecture, wherein we are going to talk about something called as phosphorylation. I hope you have heard this little bit of biochemistry into picture. We have two types of phosphorylation processes going on. Okay, the phosphorylation could be a substrate level phosphorylation. I am very sure you have heard this word in your 12th standard. And there is something called as oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so I assume that you have you are attending lecture with a pen and paper, so I want you to note down these points, that a substrate level phosphorylation is when you have phosphate group taken out from some molecule or a substrate and given to ADP so that the ATP is generated. However, if you consider the respiration and the final electron transport chain, I assume that 12th standard portion you recollect, and there is something called as passing of electron from one acceptor to another and so on and so forth. So whenever there is NAD or such electron acceptors into picture, it comes to a point that we say this is oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so that is a difference between the two. When you have phosphate group dissociated from a substrate and given to the ADP and ATP is generated, you say it is substrate level phosphorylation, which generally occurs in the glycolysis. To give you an example, if you remember the last reaction, PEP, phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate, right? The enzyme is pyruvate kinase, and that enzyme gives you two molecules of ATP. If you remember the two molecules of ATP, we invest first in the preparatory phase, and then we get 4 molecules of ATP in the payoff phase, right? So payoff phase में 4 में से 2 ATPs we get in the last step. So that last step, how do we get? Because that is also another substrate level phosphorylation step occurring. And who is carrying out that? That is being carried out by the enzyme pyruvate kinase. I hope I am being very, very clear. We have, now I'll move ahead this video. So as I told you that there was prokaryotic organism. It is saying that there were 3 types of prokaryotes. Okay, one was able to do photosynthetic reactions, other was able to utilize oxygen, and third was another prokaryote which had none of these capacities. But yes, it was so large that it could engulf these. Okay, so that big prokaryote engulfed this first the oxygen utilizing organism, and then that organism lived inside. So what will you call it as? Is it a parasitism or is it a predation? Because that organism remained alive inside, unlike whenever somebody eats something, then it gets killed, right? But this organism lived inside the other organism, so it became an endosymbiont. Okay, so it was the whole organism set was called as ancestral heterotrophic prokaryote, and then it engulfed the cyanobacteria as well. So both of them lived together inside the euge. So it becomes an autotrophic eukaryote, right? So a quick facts about it, that when you have that ATP generating organism, that evolved as your mitochondria, and the other one evolved as your chloroplast. Okay, so this is how first eukaryote came into existence. So this is what the whole endosymbiotic theory is all about, and that's it. I think after. Now then came another hypothesis called hydrogen hypothesis. If you remember in FY, you must have studied about protists, right? And you know there is something called as hydrogenosomes. So what scientists propose that even before the organelle turned out as mitochondria, it was first converted into hydrogenosome. So what is this organelle doing? In absence of external H2, it was able to generate H2, which was along with the ATP. So you can see it in the diagram here. What the M host became dependent on the bacterium, which made ATP by substrate level phosphorylation. This is what I mean, that during ATP generation, what is happening is the substrate is being used for the generation of ATP, and in the process it is able to give hydrogen to it. Okay, so this is how hydrogen hypothesis was into existence. And here the same example that I gave you is depicted. You have enzyme pyruvate kinase, and you have phosphoenol pyruvate, to which we have phosphate group, and we have adenosine diphosphate, ADP. So the enzyme, what is it going to do? It is going to kinase, that is going to phosphorylate ADP, detaching the phosphate from the substrate. So the product that we get is a pyruvate and ATP generated. Okay, so this kind of reactions wherein phosphate group is dissociated from the substrate would be called as substrate level phosphorylation. Okay, so to summarize what we learned right now, if the endosymbiont developed the capacity to perform aerobic respiration, it evolved into mitochondria. However, in those cases where endosymbiont did not acquire the ability to respire, it evolved into hydrogenosome, an organelle found in protists that produce ATP by fermentation. So this was additional point put forth into endosymbiotic theory. So first people said, okay, you had engulfment of the organism which remained as endosymbionts. So if you had a capacity to perform aerobic respiration, okay, fine, it will go. But this was something anaerobic respiration, right? Acetate and CO2 is getting generated. So you know that this is not something aerobic that is happening, right? CO2, carbon dioxide, is a byproduct of anaerobic respiration, right? So it developed into hydrogenosome is what the final point was. So again, you have now three aspects of endosymbiotic theory. Okay, one that developed into chloroplast, one that developed into mitochondria, and one that developed into hydrogenosome in case of protists. Now, what evidences were supporting this particular fact was there were some ancestral organelle for both of them. Say for example, there are certain proteins called heat shock proteins, okay, in organisms. So these heat shock proteins of mitochondria, in hydrogenosomes, and alpha proteobacteria all had the same sequence. Okay, now how can you have the same sequence if you are totally unrelated? And that is how, that was the first evidence that they said that they must be closely related. Subunits of mitochondrial enzyme NADH dehydrogenase. I hope you know this. The mitochondria has this enzyme NADH dehydrogenase, because we know that the enzymes in the mitochondria play essential role in many of the metabolic activities, and these enzymes are active in hydrogenosomes of the protists of Trichomonas vaginalis. So this was also another similarity that was found. So we say that, okay, mitochondria as well as hydrogenome, aren't they too much related with each other because they are having too much of homology between their sequences? And the third important evidence was the primitive genome found in the hydrogenosome of the protist. Nyctothera ovalis encodes components of mitochondrial electron transport chain. So this was also another. So they said everything on the basis of evidences and facts. Okay, nothing was just out of bloom, or nothing was imagined anything. You know, they had some kind of proof, and they had some kind of logic behind thinking for any proposed theory. So after going through all these similarities between hydrogenosomes and mitochondria, they said that, okay, both must have been evolved from the same ancestral organelle, which could be the engulfed organism, but the organism could be either able to respire aerobically or anaerobically. So aerobic respiring organism rahega, so it will be developed into mitochondria, otherwise it will be a hydrogenosome. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now we move ahead with another part of theory that is called as serial endosymbiotic theory. So summing up all, by the way, the picture in here is of Lynn Margulis, who put forth this theory of endosymbiotic, and then she only came up with idea something called as serial endosymbiotic theory. In this theory, what she said was, elements of endosymbiotic origin of mitochondria and genome fusion hypothesis can be combined together. Now, how can they be combined? If you remember, what was genome fusion hypothesis? Genome fusion hypothesis was when we said that bacteria and archaea combined together and they gave rise to eukaryotic organisms. So similar lines could be seen in endosymbiotic origin as well. So she said the motility first evolved through endosymbiosis between anaerobic spirochetes and another anaerobe. So she went back long when oxygenic conditions were not prevailing on the earth, and still organisms tried to engulf the other organisms. So to engulf, to go near to the other organism, it will have to be motile, right? So that motility was evolved. When nuclei were thought to have formed by the development of internal membranes. Then she said, okay, early nucleated forms would have been similar to modern protists with hydrogenosomes, with the theory that we just looked into. And the last point, she said, too many events must have taken place in order to evolve mitochondria and which came out later, much later into existence. And then everything means first eukaryote came into existence, then you had fungi and animal cells and many other things generated from it, and the one which had chloroplast would give rise to plant like cells. Okay, so this was the whole idea, that there was not just one event, she said, that must have happened. There must have been similar events on all fronts. Okay, and that must have got repeated over years and years, and then they adapted and then they changed, and after so many years we have now we are having eukaryotic cells into existence. Okay, so you have lot of terminologies to coming into picture for the taxonomy unit, and the first one is anagenesis. Even before that we have something called as punctuated equilibria. Okay, we will come to that. What is anagenesis? Anagenesis, which is also called as microevolution. Okay, micro meaning small, and evolution, so it is going to change. So small changes or genetic changes which could be random. Okay, but they are occurring over generations. Okay, which are driving speciation or extinction. Now these are two terminologies. When we say speciation, okay, that means a new species is created, and extinction, all of you know. So either a new species is created, or a species is totally vanished. So when does that happen? When you have new events taking place, and that those events could be genetically taking place in generations. So when it is happening, the event is called as a microevolution. In other words, it is called as anagenesis. Okay, anagenesis. I hope this term is very clear. The fossil record shows that the slow and the steady pace of evolution is periodically interrupted, that is stopped by rapid bursts of speciation driven by abrupt changes in the environment. Okay, so what we generally think is over the years changes हो के नए species आते हैं, but that should not be the case. Okay, sometimes it may happen that lot of environmental pressure generated on the species, and in that species some adapted to the new while some could not adapt, so survival is the fittest. Some extinct, while those who could adapt went ahead and they modified themselves to form a new species, and that is how a new species got generated. Right? So this particular type of phenomena is called as punctuated equilibria, wherein you have abrupt changes, rapid burst. ये word जब आता है तब it is always punctuated equilibria, and it was introduced by two scientists, Niles Eldredge and late Stephen Jay Gould. So what is the exact idea of punctuated equilibria? The theory describes that rate of evolution as a result of periodic or abrupt changes in the environment. So here you can see in the diagram, the genetic change is in the initial stages, it is very steady, right? Then suddenly there was a lot of change. So in that thing, species 1 got generated. यहाँ पे, ठीक है? Then again it was slow and steady. So this is like a abrupt halt, right? Interruption that we are said, periodically interrupted. So this is an interruption. This is an interruption, and then again abrupt changes. So species 2 generated. Then again halt. So this is how punctuated equilibria theory comes into existence. I hope this terminology is very clear. Anagenesis, microevolution in the other words, and punctuated equilibria. Okay. And that is the last slide for the day. Heritable genetic changes in archaea and bacteria organisms are introduced principally by two mechanisms. Either they are by mutation, or there is something called as horizontal gene transfer or lateral gene transfer. Very important concept, wherein there is एक वर्टिकल जीन ट्रांसफर होता है फ्रॉम द मदर सेल टू द डॉटर सेल, बट दूसरा है लैटरल जीन ट्रांसफर. आई होप यू हैव हर्ड अबाउट समथिंग कॉल्ड एज ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन, something about transduction, wherein you have different species exchanging their DNAs, right? So this is something also adding up, and we are going to discuss about these two terminologies more in detail in our upcoming sessions.